The golden elevator doors of the Grand Imperial Hotel slid open with a soft whisper, revealing a man who seemed oddly out of place in the marble-lined lobby. Chen Wei stepped out wearing faded jeans, worn sneakers, and a simple black t-shirt that had seen better days. His backpack looked like something a college student might carry, and his hair was slightly messy from the long flight. The contrast between his appearance and the hotel's opulent surroundings was striking. The concierge, Marcus, looked up from his polished mahogany desk and immediately frowned. His trained eye quickly assessed the newcomer, cataloging every detail from the scuffed shoes to the budget airline luggage tag still attached to the backpack. This was clearly someone who had wandered into the wrong establishment. The Grand Imperial was a 5-star hotel where rooms started at $800 per night, not the kind of place for backpackers or budget travelers. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus called out in his most professional yet dismissive tone. "I believe you may be looking for the youth hostel down the street. This is the Grand Imperial Hotel." Chen Wei approached the front desk with a gentle smile, seemingly unbothered by the assumption. "Actually, I have a reservation," he said in accented but clear English. "The name is Chen Wei." Marcus barely suppressed a sigh as he reluctantly checked his computer system. These mix-ups happened occasionally when people booked rooms they couldn't afford, only to realize their mistake upon arrival. He was already preparing his speech about cancellation policies when his expression suddenly changed. His eyes widened as he stared at the screen, then looked back at Chen Wei with confusion. "Mr. Chen," Marcus stammered, his voice now uncertain. There seems to be some kind of system error. According to this, you've booked the entire top floor for the next month." The presidential suite on the 40th floor was the hotel's crown jewel, typically reserved for heads of state, A-list celebrities, and billionaire businessmen. The booking showed a payment of over $200,000 paid in full up front. Marcus blinked several times, convinced there had to be a mistake. Chen Wei nodded calmly. "That's correct." "Is there a problem?" Before Marcus could respond, the hotel manager, Patricia Thornton, emerged from her office. She had been watching the interaction from her doorway, initially pleased to see her concierge handling what appeared to be a situation with an inappropriately dressed guest. But Marcus's sudden change in demeanor caught her attention. "Is everything all right here?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed professionalism and status. Marcus leaned toward her and whispered urgently, "Ma'am, this gentleman claims to have booked the presidential suite, but—" He gestured subtly at Chen Wei's appearance. Patricia's lips tightened into a thin line. She had dealt with credit card fraud before, and this situation had all the hallmarks of a scam. A young Asian man in shabby clothes claiming to have made a booking worth more than most people's annual salary. It was obviously some sort of identity theft or fraudulent transaction. "Sir," Patricia said, stepping forward with practiced authority, "I'm going to need to see multiple forms of identification, and will need to verify your payment method. I hope you understand that a booking of this magnitude requires additional security measures." The implication in her tone was clear. She didn't believe, for a second, that this casually dressed young man was the legitimate guest. Several other hotel staff members had begun to take notice of the commotion. The bellhops exchanged knowing glances, and even some guests in the lobby turned to observe the unfolding drama. Chen Wei reached into his backpack and calmly produced his passport and a black credit card. The card caught the light, revealing the distinctive platinum finish that indicated unlimited spending power, the kind of card that banks issued only to their wealthiest clients. Patricia examined the documents with exaggerated thoroughness, clearly hoping to find some discrepancy that would confirm her suspicions. The passport appeared genuine and the name matched the reservation, but she remained skeptical. Credit cards could be stolen, and fake documents were becoming increasingly sophisticated. "I'm afraid we'll need to contact your bank to verify this transaction," Patricia announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, given the unusual circumstances. The phrase "unusual circumstances" hung in the air like an accusation. Several guests had now stopped their conversations to watch the spectacle unfold. Chen Wei could feel their judgmental stares, taking in his appearance and drawing their own conclusions about what kind of person he must be. Of course, Chen Wei replied with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the encounter. Please do whatever you need to do. His response seemed to frustrate Patricia, who had expected protests or anger that might justify her suspicions. Instead, she found herself dealing with someone who appeared genuinely unconcerned about the verification process, as if he had nothing to hide. As Patricia made the call to the bank, the lobby atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Other guests whispered among themselves, speculating about the situation. Some suggested it was obviously a case of identity theft, while others wondered if it might be some sort of insurance scam. The consensus seemed to be that there was no way this ordinarily dressed young man could legitimately afford such an expensive accommodation. The hotel's head of security, James Rodriguez, had been discreetly observing from across the lobby. He approached the front desk with the measured steps of someone trained to handle potentially volatile situations. His presence added another layer of intimidation to what was already becoming a humiliating experience. "Is there a security concern here?" James asked, his hand resting casually on his radio. Patricia covered the phone with her hand. "Possible credit card fraud. I'm waiting for bank verification." The minutes stretched on as Patricia remained on hold with the bank. Chen Wei stood patiently, occasionally checking his phone but showing no signs of nervousness or agitation. His calm demeanor began to make some of the staff members question their initial assumptions, but the damage to his dignity had already been done. Finally, Patricia's expression changed as someone came on the line. Her confident posture began to waver as she listened to the bank representative, confirm not only the legitimacy of the transaction, but also provide details about Chen Wei's account status that clearly surprised her. "I see," she said quietly into the phone. "Thank you for your time." As she hung up, Patricia's face had gone pale. The bank had not only confirmed the transaction, but had also mentioned that Mr. Chen was one of their most valued clients, with assets that placed him in their ultra-high net worth category. The representative had even asked if the hotel required any special accommodations for such a distinguished guest. The lobby had fallen silent except for the gentle sound of the fountain in the center of the space. Patricia found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to acknowledge that she had badly misjudged the situation, but her pride prevented her from immediately apologizing. "The transaction has been verified," she announced stiffly, as if the confirmation was merely a formality rather than a complete vindication of Chen Wei's legitimacy. Despite the bank's confirmation, the atmosphere in the Grand Imperial Hotel lobby remained thick with tension and barely concealed skepticism. Patricia Thornton's announcement that the transaction had been verified was delivered with such reluctance that it seemed more like an admission of defeat than a professional acknowledgement of a valued guest. "Well then," Patricia said, her voice strained as she tried to maintain her authoritative presence. "I suppose we can proceed with check-in. However, given the unusual nature of this situation, we'll need to conduct a thorough inspection of your luggage for security purposes." This additional requirement was clearly punitive, designed to save face after the embarrassing bank confirmation. Chen Wei nodded agreeably, though several guests in the lobby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even they could recognize that this level of scrutiny was excessive for a verified guest. Marcus, still flustered by the turn of events, began typing furiously on his computer. "Sir, I'm afraid there might be another small issue." The presidential suite is typically prepared with a full staff briefing, champagne service, and personalized amenities. "Given the unexpected nature of your arrival, we haven't had time to prepare properly." The implication was clear. They hadn't believed he was legitimate, so they hadn't bothered to prepare the suite according to their usual standards for high-paying guests. Chen Wei's reservation had been in the system for 2 weeks, plenty of time for proper preparation if they had taken it seriously. "That's perfectly fine," Chen Wei replied with characteristic patience. "I'm not particular about formalities." His gracious response only seemed to irritate Patricia further. She had expected anger or demands that would justify her earlier treatment of him. Instead, she was dealing with someone who remained unfailingly polite despite being subjected to what could only be described as discriminatory treatment. James Rodriguez, the head of security, stepped forward with a metal detecting wand. "Standard procedure for all high-value bookings," he announced, though everyone in the lobby knew this was far from standard. Regular guests, regardless of their booking value, were not subjected to security screenings in the middle of the lobby. As Chen Wei submitted to the unnecessary security check, other guests began to feel increasingly uncomfortable, witnessing what was clearly targeted harassment. An elderly businessman from London whispered to his wife, "This is absolutely disgraceful. I've never seen a hotel treat a confirmed guest this way." A young couple from New York exchanged shocked looks as they watched the scene unfold. "They're basically treating him like a criminal," the woman murmured to her partner. "And all because of how he's dressed?" The security screening revealed nothing unusual, of course. Chen Wei's backpack contained typical travel items: clothing, a laptop, some books, and personal toiletries. However, Patricia wasn't finished with her power display. "I'm afraid we'll also need to escort you to your suite personally," she announced. "For security verification purposes, you understand." This was perhaps the most transparent attempt at humiliation yet. The security verification was simply an excuse to watch Chen Wei's reaction when he saw the presidential suite, presumably expecting him to be overwhelmed or to somehow reveal that he didn't belong in such luxurious accommodations. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was painfully silent. Patricia, Marcus, and James all crowded into the elevator with Chen Wei, their presence clearly meant to be intimidating. They expected him to show signs of nervousness or excitement that would confirm their suspicions about his true economic status. Instead, Chen Wei stood quietly, occasionally glancing at his phone with the casual disinterest of someone accustomed to luxury accommodations. This only frustrated his escorts further, as his behavior continued to contradict their assumptions about who he was and where he came from. When the elevator doors opened to reveal the private foyer of the presidential suite, Patricia watched Chen Wei's face carefully for any reaction. The space was magnificent: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline. Chen Wei stepped out of the elevator and looked around with mild interest, as if evaluating a hotel room was a routine part of his travel experience. "The views are nice," he commented casually. "Which direction does the main bedroom face?" This practical question, delivered without any hint of awe or excitement, clearly disappointed Patricia, who had expected gasps of amazement or obvious signs that he was out of his element. Marcus hurried ahead to open the suite's main door, revealing an interior that regularly hosted world leaders and entertainment industry royalty. The living space was enormous, with separate dining and entertainment areas, a private office, and furnishings that cost more than most people's cars. "As you can see," Patricia said with forced professionalism, "the suite includes 24-hour butler service, a private chef upon request, and access to our executive helicopter pad." She rattled off the amenities with the air of someone presenting features that she assumed Chen Wei had never encountered before. Her tone suggested that she still believed he was somehow fraudulently accessing accommodations far above his actual means. Chen Wei walked through the space, occasionally opening closets or checking the bathroom facilities. His inspection was thorough but businesslike, lacking the wonder or intimidation that Patricia had anticipated. "The office space will work well for my video conferences," he noted, examining the business area. "What are the internet speeds, and is the connection stable enough for international calls?" These were the questions of someone who actually planned to use the space for business purposes, not a tourist overwhelmed by luxury. Patricia found herself in the awkward position of providing technical specifications rather than delivering the dramatic reveal she had orchestrated. "The suite has dedicated fiber optic connections with guaranteed speeds of up to 1 gigabit. Marcus answered automatically, his professional training taking over despite his continued confusion about the situation. As they completed the tour, Patricia made one final attempt to catch Chen Wei off guard. "I trust the accommodations meet your expectations?" she asked with emphasis on the last word, still hoping to elicit some reaction that would confirm her suspicions. "They're adequate," Chen Wei replied simply. "I've stayed in similar properties in Singapore and Dubai. The layout is efficient." This casual reference to other luxury hotels in international markets was delivered so matter-of-factly that it was clearly not meant to impress anyone. Patricia realized with growing discomfort that either Chen Wei was an exceptionally skilled fraud artist, or her initial assumptions had been completely wrong. Well then, she said stiffly. "I'll leave you to settle in. Please don't hesitate to contact the concierge if you need anything." The three hotel employees retreated toward the elevator, their mission to expose Chen Wei as a fraud having failed spectacularly. As the elevator doors closed, Patricia's face was flushed with embarrassment. Though she would never admit that her treatment of the guest had been inappropriate, alone in the magnificent suite, Chen Wei finally allowed himself a small smile as he looked out at the city below. He had encountered this type of prejudice before, and had learned that dignity and patience were more effective responses than anger or confrontation. Tomorrow, he had important business meetings that could change the economic future of several companies. Tonight he would simply enjoy the peace and quiet of his temporary home. The next morning brought a buzz of activity to the Grand Imperial Hotel as word spread through the staff about the previous day's incident. The story had grown in the telling, with various versions circulating through different departments. Some staff members spoke of a potential fraud that had been narrowly detected, while others whispered about a guest who had been treated unfairly based on his appearance. In the housekeeping department, the morning briefing was particularly tense. Dorothy Williams, the head housekeeper, had been working at the Grand Imperial for 15 years. She was a tall, dignified African-American woman in her early 50s who commanded respect from her team through both her work ethic and her fair treatment of everyone, regardless of their position in the hotel hierarchy. "Ladies," Dorothy addressed her team, "we have a guest in the presidential suite who will require our most professional service. I don't want to hear any gossip or speculation about yesterday's events. Our job is to provide excellent housekeeping services, period." The team of housekeepers nodded respectfully. Dorothy had earned their loyalty not just through her competence, but through her willingness to defend her staff against unfair treatment from both guests and management. She had a reputation for treating everyone with dignity, something that had not gone unnoticed by the hotel's diverse staff. Maria Santos, one of the younger housekeepers, raised her hand tentatively. "Mrs. Williams, is it true that management thought the guest was trying to steal someone else's reservation?" Dorothy's expression grew stern. "What I heard was that there was a misunderstanding during check-in that was resolved professionally. That's all any of us need to know. Mr. Chen is a paying guest who deserves the same excellent service we provide to everyone." However, Dorothy had actually heard much more detailed accounts of the previous day's events from several staff members who had witnessed the lobby incident. The stories troubled her deeply, particularly because they reminded her of experiences from her own life, when people had made assumptions about her, capabilities or worthiness based on her appearance. As the housekeeping team prepared their carts and supplies for the day, Dorothy decided she would personally handle the presidential suite. This wasn't unusual. She often took personal responsibility for their most important guests, but this time her motivation was different. She wanted to ensure that Mr. Chen received impeccable service as a small gesture to counteract whatever prejudice he might have encountered. At 10 o'clock that morning, Dorothy knocked softly on the suite door. "Housekeeping," she announced in her professional but warm voice. Chen Wei opened the door, still dressed casually in jeans and a simple shirt. He looked somewhat tired, suggesting he might be dealing with jet lag from international travel. "Good morning," he said in English, stepping back to allow her entry. "Please come in. I was just finishing some phone calls." Dorothy entered with her cart, immediately noticing that the suite was remarkably tidy for someone who had arrived the previous evening. This suggested either that Mr. Chen was naturally organized, or that he was accustomed to staying in high-end accommodations and understood proper etiquette. "I hope you had a comfortable first night." "Mr. Chen," Dorothy said as she began her systematic inspection of the rooms to determine what cleaning was needed. "Very comfortable, thank you," Chen Wei replied. He seemed genuinely appreciative of her professionalism, especially after the previous day's treatment at the front desk. As Dorothy worked efficiently through the suite, she noticed Chen Wei had set up a sophisticated office area with multiple laptops, international charging adapters, and what appeared to be important business documents spread across the dining table. These weren't the belongings of someone pretending to be wealthy. They were the tools of someone conducting serious, international business. Chen Wei was speaking, on the phone in what sounded like Mandarin Chinese, his voice carrying the authority of someone giving instructions rather than receiving them. Dorothy couldn't understand the language, but she recognized the tone of executive leadership from her years of service to high-level business guests. "Excuse me," Chen Wei said, covering his phone. "Would it be possible to have some tea? I have an important call with Beijing in 20 minutes, and I'd appreciate something to help me stay alert." "Of course, sir," Dorothy replied. "Would you prefer green tea, black tea, or perhaps jasmine tea?" Chen Wei's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. Jasmine tea would be perfect, if it's not too much trouble. Dorothy's knowledge of different tea types wasn't accidental. She had made it her business to learn about the preferences of international guests from various cultures. This attention to detail was part of what made her so valued by discerning travelers. As she prepared to fetch the tea, Dorothy heard Chen Wei return to his phone conversation. This time she caught a few familiar words and realized with growing amazement that he was speaking in fluent Mandarin Chinese. She had been studying Mandarin for the past 3 years as part of a personal enrichment program, and while she wasn't fluent, she could recognize the language and understand some basic phrases. More significantly, she began to pick up on certain terms related to business and finance. Words like investment, acquisition, and billion stood out from his conversation. Even with her limited understanding, it was becoming clear that Chen Wei was discussing major business deals worth enormous sums of money. Dorothy quietly left to retrieve the tea, her mind racing with the implications of what she was observing. The man who had been treated with such suspicion the previous day was clearly conducting business at the highest levels of international finance. She began to feel anger at how he had been judged and treated based on his casual appearance. When she returned with the jasmine tea, perfectly prepared in the hotel's finest china service, Chen Wei was ending his call. He looked up with genuine appreciation as she set the tea service on his makeshift office table. "This is perfect, thank you so much," he said warmly. "You're very kind." Dorothy noticed that his English, while accented, was sophisticated and precise. This was clearly someone who was educated and internationally experienced, not the stereotype that the front desk staff had assumed. As she continued her housekeeping duties, Dorothy found herself growing more curious about this guest who had been so misjudged. She began to formulate a plan that would allow her to demonstrate the hotel's commitment to excellent service, while also learning more about who Chen Wei really was. "Mr. Chen," she said as she finished organizing the living area, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I couldn't help but notice you were speaking Chinese earlier. I've been studying Mandarin for a few years as a personal interest. It's such a beautiful language." Chen Wei's entire demeanor changed, his face brightening with genuine surprise and pleasure. "You're studying Mandarin? That's wonderful. It's not an easy language for English speakers to learn. What inspired you to take it up?" Dorothy felt a moment of nervousness about revealing her personal interest to a guest, but something about Chen Wei's sincere curiosity encouraged her to continue. "I've always been fascinated by different cultures," she explained, "and I noticed that many of our international guests speak Mandarin, so I thought it would help me provide better service. Plus, I find the language itself really interesting." Chen Wei nodded appreciatively. "That's very impressive. Most people don't make that kind of effort to connect with people from other cultures. Your pronunciation was actually quite good from what I could hear." This unexpected compliment made Dorothy smile. She had been self-conscious about her Mandarin skills, practicing mostly with language apps and occasional conversation groups at the local community center. Encouraged by Chen Wei's genuine interest in her language studies, Dorothy decided to take a small risk. She had been practicing a formal greeting that she hoped to use with Chinese guests, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to test her skills. "Ni hao. Wo xuang nin zai zeli zu de yu kuai," she said carefully, hoping her pronunciation was acceptable. She was attempting to say, "Hello, I hope you have a pleasant stay here." Chen Wei's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened with surprise and delight, and he broke into a genuine smile that completely transformed his tired features. For a moment he seemed speechless, clearly not having expected to encounter a staff member who could communicate in his native language. "Wo de tian a," he exclaimed, which Dorothy recognized as an expression of surprise, roughly equivalent to, "Oh my goodness." He continued in Mandarin, speaking more slowly and clearly than he had on his business calls. "Your pronunciation is excellent. How long have you been studying?" Dorothy felt a flush of pride at his praise, but also a flutter of nervousness as she realized She had reached the limit of her conversational ability. San Nian, she replied, indicating 3 years, then switched back to English with a slight laugh. But I'm afraid that's about where my skills run out for complex conversations. Chen Wei chuckled warmly and switched back to English as well. 3 years is impressive. And your tones were very good. Mandarin tones are usually the most difficult part for Western learners. The conversation had created an unexpected connection between them, and Dorothy found herself seeing Chen Wei not as a mysterious guest of questionable legitimacy, but as a person who was clearly intelligent, educated, and far from home. Her protective instincts, honed by years of caring for guests and looking out for her staff, began to extend to this man who had been treated so poorly upon arrival. "Mr. Chen," Dorothy said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I heard about what happened at check-in yesterday. I want you to know that not everyone at this hotel makes judgments based on appearances." Chen Wei's expression grew more serious, though he still maintained his gentle demeanor. "Thank you, Dorothy. May I call you Dorothy? I appreciate your kindness. Unfortunately, I encounter this type of situation quite often when I travel. People see a young Asian man in casual clothes and make assumptions." Dorothy nodded knowingly. "I understand that more than you might think. I've faced my own share of people who made assumptions about me based on how I look or what job I do." This acknowledgement of their shared experience with prejudice created an even deeper connection between them. Chen Wei looked at Dorothy with new respect, recognizing in her someone who had also had to prove herself against unfair stereotypes. "The irony," Chen Wei continued with a slight smile, "is that I actually prefer to travel simply. Expensive clothes and flashy displays of wealth often create more problems than they solve. But sometimes, as yesterday proved, simplicity is misinterpreted as inability." Dorothy began to understand that Chen Wei's casual dress was a deliberate choice, rather than an indication of his economic circumstances. This insight made the previous day's treatment seem even more unfair and short-sighted. "If you don't mind me asking," Dorothy said carefully, "what kind of business brings you to our city?" Chen Wei paused for a moment as if considering how much to share. "I'm here for several acquisition meetings. My company is looking at investing in American technology firms. And this city has some very promising candidates." The word acquisition confirmed what Dorothy had suspected from overhearing his phone conversations. This wasn't someone looking for a job or trying to break into business. This was someone with the power to buy entire companies. "That sounds like very important work," Dorothy replied. "I hope the meetings go well." "Thank you," Chen Wei said. "Actually, would you mind if I practiced a little Mandarin with you? I have a video conference with my board of directors in Shanghai this afternoon, and sometimes speaking in English all day makes me feel rusty in my native language." Dorothy was both honored and nervous about this request. "I would be happy to try, though I should warn you that my vocabulary is still pretty basic." Chen Wei smiled encouragingly. Basic conversation would be perfect. Sometimes the simple practice is the most helpful. For the next few minutes, they engaged in a simple Mandarin conversation about the weather, the city, and Dorothy's family. Chen Wei was patient and encouraging, gently correcting her pronunciation and offering alternative phrases when she struggled to express herself. During their conversation, Dorothy learned that Chen Wei had grown up in a small village in rural China, that he had worked his way through university, and that he still sent money back to support his elderly parents. His humble background made his current success even more impressive, and explained why he remained comfortable with simple living despite his wealth. "You know," Chen Wei said, switching back to English, "you have real talent for languages. Have you considered taking more advanced classes? Or perhaps visiting China to practice with native speakers?" Dorothy laughed softly. "That's a beautiful dream, but on a housekeeper's salary, international travel isn't really in my budget." Chen Wei's expression grew thoughtful. "Dorothy, can I ask you something? Do you enjoy working here at the hotel?" The question seemed to come from genuine curiosity rather than idle conversation. Dorothy considered her answer carefully. "I do enjoy the work itself," she said. "I like taking care of people and making sure they're comfortable. But sometimes—" She paused, unsure how much honesty was appropriate with a guest. "Please, speak freely," Chen Wei encouraged. "Sometimes I feel like my potential is limited by other people's assumptions about what a housekeeper can or should do. I have ideas about improving guest services, especially for international visitors, but management doesn't usually ask for input from housekeeping staff. Chen Wei nodded understanding. That's unfortunate. In my experience, the people who interact most directly with customers often have the best insights about what improvements are needed. Their conversation was interrupted by Dorothy's radio crackling to life. Dorothy, this is Patricia. I need you to report to my office immediately after you finish with the presidential suite. Dorothy's stomach dropped. She had been in the suite longer than usual, and she worried that her extended conversation with Chen Wei might be seen as inappropriate by management. Chen Wei noticed her change in expression. Is everything all right? I think I may have spent too much time here, Dorothy said with concern. Management probably wants to know why I'm behind schedule. Chen Wei's face hardened slightly. Dorothy, were you specifically told not to spend time talking with guests? Not exactly, but Dorothy struggled to explain the unwritten rules that governed hotel staff behavior. I see, Chen Wei said firmly. Well, if anyone questions your service today, please have them contact me directly. You have provided exceptional personalized service that far exceeded my expectations. Any hotel would be fortunate to have staff with your dedication and cultural sensitivity. His words were clearly meant to be repeated to management, offering Dorothy protection against any criticism she might face for their extended interaction. Dorothy made her way to Patricia Thornton's office with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Her conversation with Chen Wei had given her new confidence, but she was still concerned about potential consequences for spending extra time with a guest. The hotel's management had strict efficiency standards, and any deviation from routine could result in disciplinary action. Patricia's office was located on the 3rd floor, behind the administrative areas that guests never saw. The space was designed to project authority, with dark wood furniture, formal portraits of the hotel's ownership, and awards recognizing the Grand Imperial's service excellence. Patricia sat behind her imposing desk, reviewing what appeared to be guest satisfaction reports. Dorothy, please have a seat, Patricia said without looking up from her paperwork. Her tone was formal and slightly cold, suggesting this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. You requested to see me, ma'am? Dorothy replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite her nervousness. Patricia finally looked up, her expression stern. I understand you spent considerably more time than usual in the presidential suite this morning. Nearly an hour, according to the timesheet. Care to explain what required such extended attention? Dorothy had anticipated this question and had prepared her response carefully. The suite required detailed attention to ensure everything met our highest standards. Additionally, Mr. Chen had some specific requests that I wanted to fulfill properly. Specific requests? Patricia's eyebrows rose skeptically. What kind of requests require an hour of a housekeeper's time? He requested tea service and had some questions about local services, Dorothy replied truthfully, though she deliberately omitted the language practice and personal conversation that had comprised most of their time together. Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression suggesting she suspected there was more to the story. Dorothy, I hope you understand that we must maintain professional boundaries with all guests. Regardless of their circumstances, some guests might take advantage of staff who are overly friendly or accommodating. The implication was clear. Patricia still harbored suspicions about Chen Wei's legitimacy and was warning Dorothy against being manipulated by someone she considered potentially fraudulent. Ma'am, I provided the same courteous service I offer to all our guests, Dorothy replied carefully. Mr. Chen was completely appropriate and expressed appreciation for the hotel's hospitality. I'm sure he did, Patricia said with barely concealed sarcasm. Nevertheless, I want you to maintain standard service protocols going forward. Efficiency is important, and we can't have housekeeping staff spending excessive time with any single guest. Dorothy felt her frustration building. Patricia was essentially punishing her for providing excellent customer service, all because of continued prejudice against a guest whose only crime had been arriving in casual clothing. Of course, ma'am, Dorothy replied, knowing that arguing would only make her situation worse. Is there anything else? Yes, actually, Patricia said, consulting her notes. I want you to reassign the presidential suite to Maria Santos for the remainder of Mr. Chen's stay. I think a different approach might be more appropriate. This was clearly a punitive measure designed to limit Dorothy's contact with Chen Wei. It was also an insult to her professionalism, suggesting that she couldn't be trusted to maintain proper boundaries with guests. "Ma'am, if I may ask, has Mr. Chen complained about my service in any way?" Dorothy asked, knowing the answer but wanting to make Patricia state her reasoning explicitly. "No complaints have been filed," Patricia admitted reluctantly. "This is simply a precautionary measure to ensure optimal service delivery." Dorothy recognized this as corporate speak for prejudicial treatment, disguised as policy implementation. She was being reassigned not because of any service failure, but because Patricia disapproved of her positive interaction with a guest she continued to view with suspicion. "I understand," Dorothy said, though her tone conveyed that she understood far more than Patricia probably intended. "Will that be all?" "For now," Patricia replied dismissively. "Please brief Maria on the suite's requirements before your shift ends." Dorothy left the office feeling angry and frustrated, but also more determined than ever to ensure that Chen Wei received excellent service, despite management's continued prejudice. She found Maria Santos preparing her cart for the afternoon shift and explained the reassignment. "That's strange," Maria commented after hearing the details. "You're our best housekeeper for VIP guests. Why would they reassign the presidential suite?" Dorothy couldn't explain the real reasons without revealing her suspicions about management's motives, so she simply said, "Management decision." "But Maria, Mr. Chen is a very courteous guest who deserves our best service. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Meanwhile, in the presidential suite, Chen Wei was preparing for his important video conference with Shanghai. However, he found himself thinking about his conversation with Dorothy and her obvious intelligence and dedication. Her situation reminded him of his own early career, when his potential had been overlooked because of stereotypes and assumptions. As a successful businessman who had overcome similar challenges, Chen Wei felt a responsibility to help others who showed promise but lacked opportunities. Dorothy's language skills, cultural sensitivity, and genuine warmth were exactly the qualities that international businesses desperately needed. Yet she was trapped in a position that didn't utilize her full potential. During his video conference with the board of directors in Shanghai, Chen Wei found himself distracted by thoughts of Dorothy's situation. The meeting was discussing their American expansion strategy and the challenges they faced in understanding local markets and building relationships with American partners. "The cultural barriers remain our biggest obstacle," explained Liu Ming, the company's head of international development. "We need people who understand both Chinese business culture and American social dynamics. Finding qualified candidates has been extremely difficult." Chen Wei's eyes lit up as an idea began to form. "Actually, I may have identified someone with exactly those qualifications right here in the city." After the conference ended, Chen Wei spent time researching the Grand Imperial Hotel's corporate structure and ownership. What he discovered was troubling but not surprising. The hotel was part of a larger chain that had been struggling financially, with declining occupancy rates and increasing competition from newer properties. More concerning was the pattern of staff turnover and guest complaints he found in online reviews. Several former employees had posted anonymous reviews describing a work environment where advancement was limited by favoritism and prejudice. Guest reviews frequently mentioned inconsistent service quality and staff who seemed unmotivated or unhappy. Chen Wei realized that Dorothy's situation was likely just one example of a broader pattern of mismanagement that was damaging both employee morale and guest satisfaction. As someone who specialized in identifying undervalued assets and improving their performance, he saw opportunity where others saw problems. That evening, Chen Wei made several phone calls to business associates and legal advisors. His company had been looking for opportunities to diversify their investment portfolio, and the hospitality industry represented an interesting possibility, especially if they could find properties with good locations but poor management. The next morning, Dorothy was surprised to receive a message that Mr. Chen had specifically requested her services for his suite, overriding the previous day's reassignment. Patricia had reluctantly agreed to the request, unable to refuse a direct demand from a guest paying premium rates. When Dorothy arrived at the suite, she found Chen Wei dressed more formally than before, wearing a well-tailored business suit that suggested he had important meetings scheduled for the day. "Good morning, Dorothy," he greeted her warmly, I hope you don't mind, but I specifically requested that you handle my suite today. Yesterday's service was exceptional, and I prefer consistency in my accommodations. Dorothy felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Actually, Chen Wei said with a slight smile, I was hoping we might continue our Mandarin practice. I have another important call with Beijing this afternoon, and yesterday's conversation really helped me feel more confident in my native language. Dorothy smiled, feeling her spirits lift for the first time since her uncomfortable meeting with Patricia. I would be honored to help. As they began their language practice, Chen Wei gradually steered the conversation toward Dorothy's background and aspirations. He learned that she had completed 2 years of college before financial circumstances forced her to leave school, that she had always been interested in international business, and that she had taught herself not only Mandarin but also basic Japanese and Spanish. Dorothy, Chen Wei said after learning about her educational background, I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you ever considered returning to school to complete your degree? Dorothy's expression grew wistful. I think about it sometimes, but between work and family responsibilities, it's just not practical. And at my age, starting over seems daunting. Age can be an advantage in education, Chen Wei replied thoughtfully. Older students often have more focus and… Chen Wei walked over to his laptop and opened a file that displayed the logo of Chen International Holdings. Dorothy recognized it as one of the major multinational corporations she had occasionally read about in business news, though she had never paid close attention to the details. Dorothy, Chen Wei began, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I want you to understand exactly who you've been helping and why our conversations have meant more to me than you might realize. He turned the laptop screen toward her, revealing a corporate profile that listed Chen Wei as the chairman and CEO of Chen International Holdings. With a personal net worth estimated in the billions of dollars, the company profile described operations in technology, real estate, manufacturing, and hospitality across 12 countries. Dorothy stared at the screen in amazement, trying to process what she was seeing. You're the CEO of Chen International? I am, Chen Wei confirmed gently. And the reason I'm here isn't just for acquisition meetings. My company has been considering entering the American hospitality market, and I've been personally evaluating potential investment opportunities. The implications of this revelation began to dawn on Dorothy. You've been evaluating this hotel? Chen Wei nodded. Among others, we look for properties with good locations and infrastructure, but poor management that we can improve. The Grand Imperial fits that profile perfectly. Dorothy felt a mix of excitement and concern. Mr. Chen, I hope our conversations haven't influenced your business assessment in any way. I would never want to… Dorothy, Chen Wei interrupted gently. Your service and perspective have absolutely influenced my assessment, but not in the way you're worried about. You've shown me that this hotel has at least one exceptional employee who truly understands customer service and cultural sensitivity. That's actually a very positive indicator. He closed the laptop and sat down across from her. What troubles me is the way management has treated both of us. The prejudice I experienced during check-in, and the way you're being punished for providing excellent service, tells me a great deal about the leadership culture here. Dorothy began to understand the broader implications of what Chen Wei was saying. You're thinking about buying the hotel? We're seriously considering it, Chen Wei confirmed. But before we make any decisions, I wanted to have an honest conversation with you about what you've observed working here, and what you think could be improved. For the next hour, Dorothy found herself in the surreal position of providing business consultation to a billionaire CEO about her own workplace. She described the staff turnover problems, the cultural insensitivity she had witnessed toward international guests, and the management style that discouraged employee initiative and input. The front desk staff speak only English, she explained. Yet we have guests from all over the world. I've seen visitors from Japan, Korea, Germany, and France struggle to communicate their needs, and instead of helping, some staff members act like it's the guest's fault for not speaking perfect English. Chen Wei took notes as she spoke, asking detailed questions about staffing levels, training programs, and guest feedback systems. Dorothy's insights painted a picture of a hotel with good bones but systemic management problems that were holding it back from achieving its potential. Dorothy, Chen Wei said when she finished her assessment, I have a proposition for you. But I want you to understand that this conversation is completely separate from any business decisions my company might make about this hotel. Dorothy leaned forward, curious and slightly nervous about what he might suggest. My company is always looking for people with your combination of skills, cultural sensitivity, language abilities, and genuine understanding of customer service. We have operations throughout Asia and are expanding in America. We need people who can bridge cultural gaps and help our businesses succeed in diverse markets. Dorothy felt her heart racing. What kind of position are you talking about? Initially, a cultural liaison position based here in the city, helping our American operations better serve international clients and partners. The position would include full tuition support for completing your college degree, comprehensive language training, and international travel opportunities for cultural immersion. The offer was so far beyond anything Dorothy had ever imagined that she struggled to find words. Mr. Chen, this is incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of responsibility. Chen Wei smiled warmly. Dorothy, you've been doing exactly that kind of work right here in this hotel, except you haven't been recognized or compensated appropriately for it. The way you made me feel welcome yesterday, after I had been treated with suspicion and disrespect, showed me exactly the kind of person we need on our team. Before Dorothy could respond, there was another knock on the door. Chen Wei opened it to find Patricia Thornton again, this time accompanied by the hotel's general manager, Robert Harrison, whom Dorothy had rarely seen outside of staff meetings. Mr. Chen, Robert said with forced joviality, I hope everything has been satisfactory with your stay. I understand there may have been some minor issues at check-in that we're eager to address. Chen Wei's expression remained polite but cool. Actually, Mr. Harrison, I'm glad you're here. I've been conducting an informal assessment of your property as part of my company's evaluation process. Robert's face went pale. Evaluation process? Chen International Holdings is considering several hospitality investments in this market. Chen Wei explained matter-of-factly. We're particularly interested in properties that show potential for improvement under better management. Patricia and Robert exchanged panicked glances. They were clearly beginning to realize that they had badly misjudged not only Chen Wei's identity, but also the potential consequences of their treatment of him. I must say, Chen Wei continued, I've been very impressed with some aspects of your operation. Dorothy here has provided absolutely exceptional service that demonstrates your staff's potential when properly motivated and supported. Dorothy felt a surge of pride and gratitude as Chen Wei publicly praised her work in front of the managers who had criticized her. However, Chen Wei's tone became more serious. I've also observed some concerning patterns in management approach and staff treatment that would require significant changes before any investment could be considered. Robert, Harrison's face was now visibly sweating. Mr. Chen, if there have been any service failures, please allow us to make them right immediately. We pride ourselves on treating all guests with the utmost respect and professionalism. Chen Wei looked directly at Patricia. I'm sure you do. Dorothy, would you mind sharing with Mr. Harrison what you told me about staff training for cultural sensitivity and language services? Dorothy found herself in the extraordinary position of being asked by a billionaire CEO to educate her own managers about the deficiencies she had observed in their operation. With Chen Wei's support, she began to describe the missed opportunities and systemic problems she had witnessed, her confidence growing with each point as she realized her observations were being taken seriously for the first time. As Dorothy spoke, Patricia's face grew increasingly red with embarrassment and anger, while Robert frantically took notes, clearly recognizing that their hotel's future might depend on addressing every concern she raised. Chen Wei listened approvingly, occasionally adding his own observations about international hospitality standards and guest expectations. The conversation that had begun with management trying to discipline Dorothy for spending too much time with a guest had transformed into a comprehensive business consultation where Dorothy's insights were being treated as valuable expertise. When the meeting concluded, Chen Wei made it clear that his company's decision about the hotel would depend largely on management's willingness to implement significant changes, with Dorothy serving as a consultant on cultural sensitivity improvements. As Patricia and Robert left the suite, both looking shell-shocked by the dramatic reversal of their positions, Chen Wei turned to Dorothy with a smile. So, he said, are you ready to consider that job offer? Because I have a feeling your current employers are going to be very interested in keeping you happy from now on." Dorothy laughed, feeling as though her entire world had changed in the span of 2 days. "Mr. Chen, I think I'm ready to hear more about what Chen International Holdings has in mind." Outside the suite, the hotel staff had already begun to spread word that the casually dressed guest in the presidential suite was actually one of the world's most successful business leaders, and that their treatment of him might determine the future of their jobs. The housekeeper who had shown him kindness and respect was now being spoken of as a hero who had potentially saved the hotel through her professionalism and cultural sensitivity. For Dorothy Williams, it was the beginning of an entirely new chapter in her life, one where her intelligence, dedication, and natural gifts would finally be recognized and rewarded appropriately.